a sweet laugh in a luxurious mansion. A millionaire husband, manipulated by whispers of deceit, loses all control, his cold hands gripping his wife's throat in the middle of a painting studio, a place that once held family memories. She fights desperately. A choked scream slices through the silence like a knife in the dark. That scene was the climax of vision, ambition, and guilt, leaving everyone paralyzed. What happens next? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss more stories that go straight to the heart. The Carter family's home shone brightly on the outside, but inside, a silence that cut through the air reigned supreme. In New York, practice for the summer festival was already underway, and the city seemed to smile. Yet in that house, joy had been tucked away for a long time. Eleanor crossed the foyer with a serene step, recalling nights of music and laughter that no longer existed, and wondered at what point her marriage had grown so cold. Her husband, Jack, came home late, left his phone face down on the table, and took 2 bites without looking up. Eleanor suggested they go to the festival together on the weekend, walk through Times Square, and have a drink at sunset. Jack mumbled that he was tired, that he had a board meeting on Monday, that they would see. They finished in silence, and he got up first, as if the table were superfluous. Eleanor calmly tidied up and followed him to the living room, determined to talk without any beating around the bush or accusations. She wanted to remind him that they were still a couple. She told him she missed the unhurried afternoons, the walks by the river, the conversations that used to last until the lights went out. Jack gave a non-committal nod and turned on a lamp. Then Eleanor saw everything. In the most visible spot hung a portrait signed by Clara, the artist about whom comments had lately been arriving at her house, like leaves brought by the wind. Eleanor stood still, asking when he had decided to bring that work and why he had taken down their wedding photo without consulting her. Jack replied that the photograph was safely stored, that art deserved a good place, and that there was no need to be dramatic. Eleanor suppressed the urge to raise her voice and chose a slow, firm approach. She reminded him that this home had been built by the 2 of them, and that deciding together what to display was not a detail. It was respect. Jack repeated that he was tired, that he didn't want to argue, that they would talk another day. She knew that another day would never come if she didn't force it. She looked at the portrait and perceived the unspoken story. She saw scenes without her presence, messages sent at hours that were once theirs, calls that were cut short when she entered the room. She took a deep breath to order her words and asked that he take down the painting until they could talk calmly. Jack shook his head and spoke of prestige, contacts, and invitations. Eleanor understood that it wasn't about taste, but about a declaration. That portrait occupied the symbolic place of their shared history. That gesture turned their marriage into a stage where one person decides and the other observes. To avoid accusations, she changed course and spoke about the weekend. She suggested visiting her parents and stopping by a downtown gallery for an exhibition. She said she felt like walking without an agenda, blending in with the crowd, and celebrating that spring was alive. Jack barely looked at her, promised to think about it, and typed a brief message. Eleanor felt the silence settle between them again like a wall. A while later, he commented on the price of the painting and the value of its author. Eleanor replied that the value of a house is not measured by a canvas, but by what happens inside it. Jack raised his eyebrows with annoyance and ended the conversation with a, "We'll talk later." Eleanor noticed the precipice of useless words and decided not to continue. She said she would go upstairs for a moment and that she would be leaving early the next day. Jack asked if she wanted the car, offered the chauffeur, and she refused with a gesture. She would take the subway. She liked to listen to the city when traveling together, to see hands with market bags, children with balloons, and grandparents arguing about baseball. Before leaving the living room, Eleanor gathered the serenity she had left and calmly insisted again. She asked Jack to put himself in her shoes for a minute. She asked if he really thought it was fair that the face of another woman should occupy the place of their shared memory. Jack, standing by the sofa, held her gaze for an instant and repeated that she shouldn't overreact. "Art," he said, "doesn't need permission." Eleanor collected 2 glasses, took them to the kitchen, and returned to say goodbye. She wasn't looking for a scene. She was looking for clarity. She thought of her mother, of the patience with which she folded blankets, of the way her father always offered coffee twice so that no one was left without a kind gesture. She remembered that family teaches you to talk face to face without humiliation. She decided she would do the same. She went up the hallway and closed her bedroom door to take a deep breath. She looked at herself in the mirror with serene attention. She saw she was tired, but still in charge of her decisions. She took her phone and checked the hours of a gallery downtown. She planned her morning without consulting, ready to follow a straight line. She knew she needed to look into the eyes of the woman who was starting to circulate in her life with a name of her own. She also knew that she had to do it with calm and dignity. She went down for her purse, left a note with a shopping list, and returned to her room. She breathed in the silence of the house and heard a festival song from a distance. She sat on the bed, placed her hands on her knees, and allowed her fatigue to transform into a simple determination. She remembered the happy nights and compared them with that desolate afternoon. She understood that she couldn't keep waiting for things to sort themselves out. She needed to move. Jack knocked on the door to say goodnight, and she replied with courtesy. There were no accusations or tears, just a distance that no one was pretending not to see anymore. Eleanor lay down for a few minutes, closed her eyes, and listened to her own pulse. The city was still alive beyond the windows, and yet, in her chest, calm was beginning to return. When she stood up again, she put the note in her purse and turned off the light. Before sleeping, she looked toward the dark hallway like someone calculating the path of the next day. Then, in a voice barely audible, and so that only her heart could hear her, she said what she had been putting off since the afternoon. "I have to talk to her." The downtown neighborhood was full of colors and voices, but inside the gallery, an invisible tension reigned. Eleanor had sworn to talk to the woman in the portrait, and now she was facing her. She walked with a firm step among the visitors, politely greeted a couple of acquaintances, and kept her head held high. The murmuring of the people commented on the strength of the brushstrokes, the freshness of the figures, and everyone gathered around Clara, the artist who smiled confidently while accepting congratulations. Eleanor watched from a distance, took a deep breath, and decided she could no longer postpone the inevitable. It wasn't just about a painting hanging in her house. It was the shadow that was spreading over her marriage, and that now had a real face. Clara dressed elegantly, spoke fluently, and was generous with her admirers. To every comment, she responded with a compliment. To every gesture, she responded with a calculated smile. Eleanor waited for the group to clear and approached calmly. She greeted her with a simple, "Good afternoon," without losing her composure. Clara recognized her instantly, though she had never seen her in person. There was something in the way she looked at her that gave away the legitimate wife. The atmosphere tensed without the need for words. One of the gallery's collaborators discreetly withdrew, aware that this conversation was not part of the official program. Eleanor took the initiative. She asked Clara to speak in a quieter corner, and she accepted, feigning naturalness. They went to a side room where minor works hung, with fewer people. There, Standing face to face, the real duel began. Eleanor spoke with clarity. She said she understood perfectly what was happening, and that she did not plan to be silent. She asked her to leave Jack alone, not to insist on appearing in their lives as if she had some right. She reminded her that there was a marriage, a history, and a life together that deserved respect. Clara listened without interrupting, tilted her head, and after a few seconds, began to cry softly. The tears surprised Eleanor, but did not confuse her. Clara covered her face with her hands. She mumbled that Jack had abandoned her, that she truly loved him, that she had only been a victim of unfulfilled promises. She spoke in a broken voice, painted a scene of loneliness and helplessness, and managed to get a couple of passing visitors to stop for a few moments. They saw Eleanor in front of a woman who was crying and frowned, interpreting without understanding. Clara knew that every tear was a weapon, and she used them with mastery. Eleanor remained calm. She didn't raise her voice or fall into the trap. She replied that she didn't believe her, that she knew how to recognize a theatrical performance, and that her role as a victim could not hide the reality. Clara smiled through her tears, as if she had gotten what she wanted. With a slight gesture, she attracted the attention of a critic who admired her, and, without saying anything, let the scene speak for itself. Eleanor felt surrounded by an uncomfortable murmur, but she didn't let herself be defeated. She remembered her mother's teaching. Never get into the mud of insults, because the mud always stains both people. So she spoke with serenity, yet with firmness. She said that the truth would come out sooner or later, that what is built on lies does not last. She looked Clara directly in the eyes and warned her that the story was not going to end in that room, or with fake tears. Clara, still with a contrite expression, mumbled that Eleanor was just jealous, that she couldn't stand to see that Jack had found inspiration elsewhere. That phrase ignited a spark in Eleanor's chest. It wasn't jealousy. It was dignity. It was the defense of a shared life that was being despised with gestures and words. A couple of visitors withdrew when they noticed the tension. Clara, seeing that the scene was losing its audience, changed her strategy. She took a step closer and spoke almost in a whisper. She told Eleanor that Jack needed her, that his career depended on the relationship with her, that there was more at stake than simple feelings. Her eyes shone with ambition disguised as fragility. Eleanor understood that behind the tears was calculation, that everything was a strategy to maintain her position in the artistic and social circle. That certainty gave her strength. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and replied that she did not intend to play that game. She reminded her that her marriage was not a contract or a stepping stone for anyone's ambition. Clara was silent for a few seconds, and then changed her expression. The tears disappeared. Her mouth curved into a brief, icy smile. She leaned toward Eleanor, like someone sharing a secret, and told her that no matter what she did, in the end, Jack would choose the place where he felt admired. That phrase was like an invisible blow. Eleanor did not react with anger. She reacted with coldness. She replied that respect is not negotiable, and that she was willing to defend it with her head held high. At that moment, Jack appeared at the door. He didn't enter the room. He stayed at a distance, observing. He saw Clara wiping away tears. He saw Eleanor with a firm expression. He didn't ask anything. He didn't interrupt. But his presence added weight to the scene. Clara turned to him with a pitiful expression. She sought his gaze as someone begging for protection. Eleanor understood the maneuver and knew that the worst was yet to come. The time had come to make a decision. She could not continue to allow another person to dictate the course of her life with lies and manipulations. Eleanor said goodbye with a simple, "Good evening." Her voice did not tremble. Clara watched her walk away, and on her lips appeared another smile, this time of momentary triumph. Before leaving the gallery, Eleanor heard her whisper, so softly that only she heard it. "You'll see who wins this game." The phrase lingered in the air like a dark echo. Eleanor did not respond. She did not turn her head. She walked toward the exit with her heart racing, and the certainty that this battle had only just begun. On the street, the cool night air hit her face. The noise of downtown, with its open bars and people talking on the patios, enveloped her as a reminder that life went on, beyond deceit and fake tears. She clutched her jacket, took a deep breath, and thought about her next move. She couldn't stay silent anymore. The way home was long, not because of the distance, but because of the weight of the decision in her chest. The city wasn't looking at her, but she felt that her steps were marking a different direction. When she got home, the clock was striking midnight. Jack still hadn't returned. Eleanor looked at herself in the foyer mirror and saw she was different. She had faced the woman who intended to take her place and had discovered the real face behind the mask. She went up the stairs with a firm step, got ready for bed, and before closing her eyes, she repeated to herself in silence that it wasn't over. The battle for her dignity and for the truth was just beginning, and she was ready to fight it with calm, with serenity, and with all the strength of her family behind her. The afternoon in Jack's studio smelled of fresh paint and betrayal. Clara's words still resonated in Eleanor's mind, more as a warning than a threat. From the downtown gallery, she had returned with a racing heart and a bitter certainty. The woman in the portrait not only wanted the place of a wife, she wanted to destroy her little by little. Eleanor decided that tonight she would confront Jack. She went up the stairs with a firm step, found him in the studio reviewing some sketches, and took a deep breath before entering. It was not the time for evasion. She had to speak, even if her voice broke in the middle of the storm. Jack was standing, arms crossed, feigning calm. There was a tension in his eyes that gave him away, as if he had been arguing with himself for hours. Eleanor greeted him in a neutral tone, and immediately asked why he had hung Clara's portrait in the living room. Jack replied coldly, saying it was a work of value that it made no sense to be dramatic about. Eleanor insisted, reminding him of their years of marriage, the shared sacrifices, the life they built together. She said that the portrait was not innocent art, but a symbol of contempt. Jack interrupted her with a brusque gesture. He repeated that he was tired of accusations, and that she didn't understand what it meant to move in certain circles. At that moment, Clara appeared, with the excuse of delivering some forgotten brushes. She greeted them with a sweet voice, feigning surprise to see Eleanor there. She approached slowly, and suddenly, as in a calculated play, she began to cry. She mumbled that she had only come to help, that she didn't want problems, that she was the one who suffered in silence. Eleanor was not fooled and yelled at her to stop acting. She pointed to the door and told her to get out of the house. Clara looked down, sobbed, and sought refuge in Jack's eyes, which began to twitch. Eleanor, her voice firm, warned her husband that that woman was destroying what little was left of their marriage. Jack felt the words cut through him, and Clara's tears push him to the edge. The silence was broken by a dry slam of his hand against the table. He shouted that he was fed up, that he couldn't stand any more humiliation, that he wasn't going to allow anyone to insult Clara in front of him. Eleanor took a step back, incredulous, and replied that what he couldn't stand was seeing how he himself was destroying their family. Clara, her face still wet, made a grimace that no one else saw. It was the sign that the plan was working. Her feigned crying had taken hold of Jack, and every word from Eleanor was perceived as an attack. Eleanor raised her voice. She demanded that Jack choose between his marriage or that farce. And then, everything exploded. Jack advanced toward her with his fists clenched. Eleanor did not retreat. She looked him directly in the eyes. The moment seemed suspended until he grabbed her by the neck with violence. He squeezed with a blind fury, without measuring his strength, without listening to reason. Eleanor tried to free herself. Her hand sought to push him away while she lacked air. Her face turned red, her eyes filled with involuntary tears. The scene was brutal, an outburst of anger contained for months. Clara watched in silence, and little by little, the feigned sadness turned into a smile of triumph. What she had wanted from the beginning was fulfilled before her eyes. The separation of the Carters. Every second of that assault was for her the confirmation of her victory. Her gaze shone with malice as she enjoyed the spectacle. Eleanor tried to utter a few broken words, begging him to let go. Jack, in a moment of lucidity, loosened his grip a little, but tightened it again when he heard Clara's sob. It was then that Eleanor, with all her strength, pushed him back. He stumbled against an easel and lost his balance for a moment. Eleanor's breathing was ragged. Her hands trembled, but her voice came out with a clarity that cut through the silence. She told him she would never allow him to treat her like that again, that what he had done was unforgivable. The echo of her words resonated in the studio. Jack stood still for a few seconds, unable to process what had just happened. The fury transformed into fear. Fear of what he had done and what he could lose. He looked at Clara for comfort, but all he received was a cruel smile. Clara did not hug him, did not stop him. She only enjoyed the result. Eleanor understood at that moment that she was not alone against Jack, but against a calculated plot of manipulation. Eleanor ran to the door, still with tears in her eyes, and yelled that this was not over. Her voice thundered like a gunshot in the hallway. Jack tried to reach her, but stopped when he saw Clara's icy gaze. That look cut through him, showing him that he had crossed a line he could not erase. Clara took a step toward him, feigned concern, and whispered that everything would be okay, that she would support him. But the smile she couldn't hide said the opposite. Jack fell into the trap and didn't realize it. He had destroyed the bond with Eleanor with his own hands and had handed over his life to the woman who fed on his ruin. Eleanor ran out of the house, looking for air, looking for strength. Her tears were no longer just of pain. They were of contained fury and wounded dignity. Every step took her further away from the studio and from the scene she never imagined she would live through. She knew that night would mark a before and after in her life. What she had seen and felt could not be forgotten. In the studio, Jack collapsed into a chair, breathing heavily, looking at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. Clara approached and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. She told him he should calm down, that Eleanor had always been unfair, that he deserved someone who understood him. Her words were poisoned honey, and Jack, confused, closed his eyes, seeking relief. He didn't suspect that the wound he had just opened would be his condemnation. Silence returned to fill the room, but it was no longer the same silence as before. It was a heavy silence, broken by the shadow of what had happened. Clara, with triumph on her lips, knew that the war was just beginning, but she had already won the first battle. Meanwhile, Eleanor was walking away through the streets, swearing that she would not give up. The bells of a nearby church struck midnight. Her life had just changed forever, and in her eyes there was pain, but also the spark of a decision that would not be extinguished. Eleanor managed to break free, opened the studio door, and fled screaming. "This is not over here." Eleanor arrived at her parents' house with her neck red and her breathing ragged. She rang the doorbell hard, almost desperately, and when Mrs. Davis opened the door, she hugged her without the need for words. The mother felt the trembling in her daughter's body and knew that something irreparable had happened. Mr. Davis appeared immediately, his face hardened, and led her to the dining room. Eleanor collapsed into a chair, still trembling, and said with a broken voice that Jack had tried to strangle her in the studio, that Clara was there watching everything with a triumphant smile. The silence in the room was like contained thunder. Mrs. Davis covered her face with her hands, unable to hold back her tears. Mr. Davis hit the table with his fist and swore that it would not go unpunished. Eleanor, between sobs, recounted every detail, from the argument in the gallery to the brutal scene in her own house. Her words were knives, and each one stabbed into the hearts of her parents. Mrs. Davis prepared a chamomile tea to soothe her daughter's throat, but Eleanor could barely drink a sip. She wanted to talk. She wanted to get the poison of that night off her chest. She said that Clara had faked tears, that she had hidden behind the mask of a victim, and that Jack had fallen into the trap like a blind man. The most painful thing was remembering the moment he squeezed her neck with his hands. She said that in his eyes, there was no love or doubt, only rage. Mrs. Davis cried in silence, caressing her hand, repeating that she was alive, that that was what was important. Mr. Davis, standing in front of the window, breathed like a bull preparing to charge. He said that Jack had crossed a line, that no business, no prestige could justify such brutality. Eleanor tried to justify herself, saying that she had yelled, that she had asked for explanations, but that at no point did she deserve that violence. She wanted to make it clear that she was not a passive victim, that she had resisted, and that in the end, she had managed to push him away and escape. Mr. Davis looked at her with pride, but also with impotence. He said that the most dangerous thing was not the physical blow, but Clara's smile watching the spectacle. That detail made the air feel heavier. Mrs. Davis repeated that dignity could not be lost, that even if Jack crawled back later begging for forgiveness, the marks on Eleanor's neck were indelible proof. The conversation became more tense when Eleanor mentioned the message Jack had sent her minutes later. It said he was sorry, that he only wanted peace, that it had all been a misunderstanding caused by Clara's hysteria. Mr. Davis demanded to see the phone. Upon reading it, he threw the newspaper on the table and exclaimed that those words were pure cowardice, that peace is not asked for after squeezing a wife's neck. Mrs. Davis, more compassionate, said that perhaps it was a first step, but Eleanor interrupted and assured them that she would not reply. She said she no longer trusted his repentance, that every apology was a chain that tied her more to a hell. Mrs. Davis suggested waiting until the next day and meeting at a classic New York cafe with an old family friend who was a journalist, someone who knew the truth of social circles and could give advice. Eleanor accepted, although her heart was still on fire. She knew she needed outside help to face Jack and Clara's power and manipulation. Mr. Davis nodded gravely and said that, in the meantime, his daughter would not return to that house. Eleanor hugged her parents and felt, for the first time in hours, a small haven of security. The night advanced slowly. Eleanor relived the scene over and over, each time more convinced that Clara had planned everything. She told them how the woman had feigned weakness, how she had sought Jack's gaze at the exact moment, how she had enjoyed it when he lost control. Mrs. Davis sobbed upon hearing that word. Plan. Mr. Davis murmured that turned Clara into a declared enemy, more dangerous than any business adversary. Eleanor stood up and looked at herself in the dining room mirror. The reflection showed a woman with a marked neck, but with eyes alight. She said aloud that she didn't want revenge. She wanted justice, and that if Jack wanted to show repentance, he would have to break up with Clara and take that portrait out of the living room. Mr. Davis applauded his daughter's clarity. He said that a woman who knows what she demands has already won half the battle. Mrs. Davis hugged her, proud of her integrity. The tension returned when Mr. Davis asked Eleanor to describe again how Jack had put his hands on her neck. Eleanor obeyed with pauses, each word loaded with pain. Mr. Davis clenched his jaw and slammed the table with an open palm. He swore that Jack would have to answer, that no family name or wealth would protect him. Mrs. Davis begged him not to lose his head, that justice should be sought with intelligence, not with impulses. Eleanor, in tears, asked her father not to act that very night. She said she was safe, and that the important thing was to think through every step. Finally, Eleanor went up to the guest room. She looked at herself in the mirror and recognized a new version of herself, marked by pain, but also by determination. She remembered her childhood days, family dinners, advice on patience and dignity. She understood that what she now carried in her chest was not pure rage. It was a memory of what she deserved and what she would never accept again. She went down again to hug her father and said, "Thank you," in a firm voice. He replied that a family name is worth nothing if it doesn't defend people. That night, as she lay down with the light on, Eleanor closed her eyes and whispered through tears that she no longer knew the man she had married. Her broken voice resonated in the darkness, making it clear that the war had only just begun. The dawn arrived with the cold air that did not clear the tension of the previous night. Eleanor got up early at her parents' house and dressed soberly. Mrs. Davis made her some light coffee and reminded her that calm would be her best weapon. Mr. Davis insisted on accompanying her to the cafe, where an old family friend, a journalist seasoned in the secrets of New York society, was waiting for them. Eleanor accepted, aware that she needed guidance and also witnesses to her truth. As she left the house, she took a deep breath. She had the feeling that every step toward that cafe was a step toward a greater battle. The cafe was buzzing with conversations and gatherings. The waiters greeted Mr. Davis with respect, and at a table apart, Mark, a family friend and journalist, who had uncovered more than one scandal in business circles, was waiting. Eleanor greeted him politely, but wasted no time in going around. She told him what had happened in Jack's studio, how Clara had faked tears, how Jack had assaulted her in front of his mistress. Eleanor's voice remained firm, although her hands were still trembling. Mark listened in silence, taking mental notes, and in the end, he bowed his head. He said that her story was not just a personal drama, but also a trap that someone was setting with precision. Mark asked for details about Clara, her connections, her presence in galleries and cocktails. Eleanor explained what she knew. She mentioned the triumphant smile she had seen on her face and the way she manipulated the gazes of others. Mr. Davis intervened harshly, assuring them that all of that was part of a plan to sink the Carter's family, and that what had happened in the studio was the clearest proof. Mrs. Davis, more serene, asked them to think about the strategy carefully, because a false step could turn against them. Mark agreed. He said that Clara was not acting alone, that she had support in certain art circles, and that it was most likely that she would use her story to gain sympathy. Eleanor felt that the weight of the truth was getting heavier, but also that she was no longer alone. She told Mark about Jack's message, that empty apology in which he asked for peace as if nothing had happened. The journalist laughed bitterly. He said that Jack's words were a poorly written script, a confession disguised as calm. Mr. Davis clenched his fists and swore that that man would not lay a finger on his daughter again. Mark, pragmatic, asked for patience. He explained that the most important thing was not to let Clara write the narrative. If they remained silent, the other side would occupy all the space. Eleanor then understood that her silence could become her worst enemy. She confessed that she felt ashamed, that she didn't want her life to become a spectacle, but that she also couldn't bear to see Clara play the victim in front of everyone. Mark looked her directly in the eyes and assured her that dignity is also defended by telling the truth, even if it hurts. Mrs. Davis supported that idea, reminding her daughter that hiding only protects the guilty. Eleanor took a deep breath and decided that she would speak, that her voice would be clear and unadorned. At that moment, an acquaintance entered the cafe and greeted Mr. Davis. He approached with curiosity, asking if it was true what he had heard about an argument at the Carter's house. Eleanor tensed. She didn't want rumors, but she understood that they were already circulating. Mark intervened and masterfully deflected the conversation, but the scene served to confirm that the story was escaping their control. It was a matter of days, perhaps hours, before all of New York would be talking about what had happened. Mark proposed that they prepare a clear story before the gossip multiplied. He suggested that Eleanor give her version privately to trusted people, that she should appear firm, but not vengeful. He said that people always respect more those who speak with serenity than those who shout with rage. Eleanor listened and nodded. She knew that her path would not be easy, but she also knew that remaining still would be allowing Clara to gain ground. Mr. Davis hit the table and said that the Ruiz family would be united in every step. Mrs. Davis took her daughter's hand and assured her that pain could be turned into strength. The conversation lasted almost 2 hours. They talked about possible allies, old friends who still respected the Ruiz family name, and neighbors who had seen the deterioration of the marriage. Eleanor was surprised by the network of support that was beginning to emerge. For the first time since the assault, she felt that shame was giving way to a strange calm, as if in the midst of the chaos, she had found a point of firmness. Mark concluded that the battle was just beginning, but that the truth, if told clearly, could checkmate Clara's plan. When they left the cafe, the city was bustling with life. Eleanor walked with her parents and thought about how far away the woman who had fled, suffocated by fear, had been the night before. Now, although still hurt, she felt capable of facing whatever came. Mr. Davis asked her if she was prepared for the stares, for the malicious comments. Eleanor replied yes, that she would not let herself be broken. Mrs. Davis smiled with pride and said that the strength of a family is measured in these moments. On the way home, Eleanor locked herself in her room for a moment and looked in the mirror. She saw her tired face, the light marks on her neck, but also the eyes of someone who had decided to resist. She whispered to herself that she would not allow Clara to write the story. Outside, Mr. Davis was talking on the phone, looking for allies, and Mrs. Davis was preparing dinner as if the world could be held together in a shared meal. Eleanor closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she felt that her voice had a path. The war continued, but she was not alone. That night, as the lights of New York came on, Eleanor sat with her parents and said aloud that she was ready to fight with the truth. Her words resonated like an oath, and Mr. Davis squeezed her hand tightly. Mrs. Davis, with contained tears, said that this was the beginning of a new stage. Eleanor looked out the window and thought of Jack and Clara, but not with fear, but with the clarity of someone who has decided not to be silent anymore. Jack woke up with a knot in his stomach. He had barely slept, tormented by the image of Eleanor escaping from the studio with tears in her eyes and her breathing ragged. Clara had stayed with him until late, whispering that it was all his wife's hysteria, that he had a right to defend himself, that he should free himself from that burden to be truly free. However, in the silence of the morning, those words turned into knives. His conscience returned the echo of what he had done and confronted him with an uncomfortable truth. He had crossed a line from which there was no return. He decided to go to Clara's gallery with the intention of clearing his thoughts. He found her smiling, talking to a foreign art dealer, as if nothing had happened the night before. Jack took her to a corner and asked for an explanation. He wanted to know why she had faked tears in front of Eleanor, why she had provoked the argument. Clara feigned surprise and denied it with a broken voice, but a flicker of arrogance shone in her eyes. She told him that she did everything for him, that Eleanor would never support him like she did, that the art world needed a muse capable of giving him prestige and visibility. Jack hesitated, but the memory of Clara's smile while he lost control made him tremble. That same day, he received a call that hit him like a hammer. A partner warned him that rumors were circulating about a violent altercation at his house, that someone had seen Eleanor enter her parents' house with marks on her neck, that the press was starting to snoop. Jack was paralyzed. He remembered Mark, the journalist friend of the Ruiz family, and understood that Eleanor's version was beginning to make its way. Fury mixed with fear. If the story became public, his reputation and his businesses could fall apart. As evening fell, Jack decided to confront Clara more firmly. He asked her to speak clearly, that he could not continue in the middle of a crossfire. Clara smiled with poisonous calm. She told him that the rumors were not a problem if he publicly recognized her as his partner, that all he needed was to appear by her side at an upcoming event, that the scandal would be diluted in praise if he showed he was in love with such a talented artist. That phrase was like a bucket of ice water. Jack understood that Clara had not been crying for him or for love, but because every tear had been a weapon in her plan to ascend. Rage consumed him. He grabbed her arm and demanded that she tell the truth. Clara did not flinch. She whispered in his ear that, if he abandoned her, she herself would take care of leaking to the press every detail of what had happened in the studio, that she would say that he had raised a hand against his wife, and that she, as a witness, had seen everything. Jack felt a shiver. He was caught in a web that he himself had woven by allowing himself to be seduced by Clara's smiles. That night, alone in his office, Jack went over every word. He realized that Clara had manipulated him from the beginning, that she had sown doubts against Eleanor, that she had pushed him into a state of rage until he exploded. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man he had been. He was not the respected businessman or the proud husband. He was a man on the verge of collapse. He thought of Eleanor, of the years they had shared, of the trust he had destroyed, and he felt for the first time a deep fear of losing everything, not just his prestige, but the only person who had ever truly supported him. The next morning, Jack received an unexpected visit. A close friend of the Ruiz family asked him to reconsider, that Eleanor was surrounded by support, that the press was waiting for just a spark to start the fire. He warned him that Clara was not an ally, but an executioner, that she had already started talking to other dealers about the fall of the Carters. Jack swallowed hard and understood that the rumors were not mere echoes. They were knives aimed at his heart and his family name. Jack looked for Clara one last time. He found her at a cocktail party, laughing loudly, surrounded by admirers. When she saw him, she feigned tenderness and approached him with her usual smile. He, his voice harsh, told her that he knew everything, that he had discovered her game. Clara did not bother to deny it. She replied that life belongs to those who know how to take advantage of opportunities, that Eleanor was weak, and that he needed someone who knew how to pull strings in the shadows. Jack, his face distorted, understood that the woman he had presented as inspiration was, in reality, the architect of his ruin. Upon returning home, the emptiness became unbearable. Jack fell to his knees in his office and pounded the floor with his fists. The echo of his breathing was the only sound in the room. For the first time in years, he did not think about business or prestige. He thought about the word forgiveness. He remembered Eleanor's gaze before she escaped, a mixture of fear and dignity, and he knew that image would haunt him forever. At that moment, his mobile vibrated with a new message from Clara. It said that his time was running out, that he had to choose either her, with all that implied, or the public scandal that would sink him. Jack looked at the screen with trembling hands and understood that he was facing the most brutal truth. He had been a pawn in a game he never understood. Jack collapsed on the sofa, defeated. The weight of his mistake was crushing him. He closed his eyes and mumbled that he had lost his way, that Clara had manipulated him, that Eleanor had been right from the beginning. The confession did not change anything, but it marked the beginning of his downfall. Outside, the city continued with its usual noise, but inside that house, a deadly silence had settled. Jack, his voice subdued, acknowledged that he was losing everything he once thought was his. In the gloom of the night, while the phone vibrated with insistence, Jack whispered to himself, "I have fallen into Clara's trap, and maybe there is no way out." Eleanor woke up in her parents' house with a weight on her chest that wouldn't let her breathe. She knew that rumors were already circulating throughout New York. She knew that Clara was pulling her strings, and that Jack, in his silence, was allowing the lie to spread like wildfire. During breakfast, Mr. Davis told her in a grave voice that several partners had called, asking about what had happened. Mrs. Davis, more worried, looked into her eyes and warned her that the story would soon become public and that she had to decide whether to remain silent or speak out. Eleanor understood that she could no longer hide. The pain in her neck was still visible, but her greatest wound was in her soul, in her betrayed pride. That same day, Mark, the family's journalist friend, showed up with a folder full of documents. He had obtained evidence that Clara had manipulated contracts and falsified data in the gallery to appropriate money and contacts. He explained that she was not only an ambitious woman, but also a fraud who used art as a cover. Eleanor listened to him carefully and understood that this was the missing piece. It was not just about clearing her name, but about completely unmasking Clara. Mr. Davis suggested taking the evidence to court immediately. Eleanor, more cautious, said that they must first ensure that the media received the information at the same time. The truth had to explode with such force that no one could cover it up. In the afternoon, Jack appeared at the Davises' house, defeated, with a lost look. He asked to speak with Eleanor again. Mr. Davis refused at first, but she accepted, on the condition that the conversation be brief and without shouting. They locked themselves in the living room, and the silence was unbearable. Jack tried to apologize. He said he was sorry, that Clara had manipulated him, that he didn't know when he had lost control. Eleanor listened to him coldly. When he finished, she told him that his repentance was late, that his actions had left scars that no apology could erase. Jack broke down in tears, begging for an opportunity to make amends. Eleanor remained firm. She told him that if he wanted to redeem himself, he would have to publicly break up with Clara and hand over all the evidence of her complicity. While that conversation was happening, Clara was preparing for her final blow. She called the press to announce a major international exhibition. and presented herself as the persecuted artist who had survived the jealous rages of Jack's wife. Her speech was dramatic, calculated, full of phrases designed to generate pity. But what she didn't expect was that, just as the cameras were focusing on her, the documents that Mark had prepared began to circulate on the journalist's mobile phones. Falsified contracts, emails where she admitted to manipulating Jack, even messages in which she mocked the naivete of art dealers. The room turned into chaos. Clara tried to yell that it was a setup, but the evidence was too clear. Eleanor received the news at home from Mark, who came running with his phone in his hand. The smile on his face was the confirmation that the plan had worked. Mr. Davis hugged his daughter tightly, saying that the truth, although late, always wins. Mrs. Davis cried in silence, grateful that her daughter's honor was beginning to be restored. Eleanor, however, did not celebrate. She knew that the battle was not completely won. Clara still had allies, and Jack still had to decide whose side he was on. At dusk, Jack returned. This time he brought a folder of his own. He handed it to Eleanor and told her that in it were all the emails, contracts, and movements in which he had participated under pressure from Clara. His voice was weak, almost broken. He admitted that he had fallen into the trap out of weakness and ambition. Eleanor looked at him intently. In a long silence, she evaluated whether there was still any humanity left in that man. Finally, she told him that those proofs would serve their purpose, but that his forgiveness was not at stake. What was at stake was justice. That night, the news spoke of Clara's fall. The headlines no longer spoke of a victim artist, but of a manipulator exposed. Society was divided between morbid curiosity and indignation. Jack became another spectator of the collapse that he himself had helped to provoke. Eleanor, on the other hand, was transformed into the voice of resistance. Her interview, added to the evidence, had placed her as a symbol of courage in the midst of a world of lies. Before going to sleep, Eleanor went out onto the balcony of her parents' house. She looked at the illuminated New York sky and remembered every moment of pain, every tear, every silence. She understood that she had survived not only because of her strength, but because of the unity of her family and the truth she had dared to tell. She closed her eyes and promised that the next step would be to ensure that neither Clara nor anyone else could destroy another person's dignity so easily. In the gloom of the night, with the echo of the city in the distance, Eleanor whispered to herself that the war was not over yet. The trial was yet to come. She still had to face those who had wanted to destroy her. But one thing was certain. Fear no longer had a place in her heart. Eleanor woke up the day of the trial with a calm that surprised her. She had spent weeks of storms, interviews, rumors, sleepless nights. But looking at herself in the mirror, she saw that she was firm. She knew that this day would not only decide the fate of Clara and Jack, but also her own. Mr. Davis and Mrs. Davis accompanied her to the courthouse, holding her arm with the pride of those who know that truth is stronger than any lie. The room was packed with journalists, businessmen, and curious onlookers. All of New York seemed to have stopped to witness that outcome. When Eleanor entered, all eyes turned to her. She walked straight, without wavering, and took a seat next to Mark, who was acting as her advisor. At the other end was Clara, impeccable as always, but with a look of nervousness in her eyes. She tried to maintain her victim role, but the attention of the room betrayed her. Jack, on the other hand, looked haggard, as if he had aged 10 years in a few weeks. He had decided to testify and present himself as a collaborator, a late attempt to redeem himself in the eyes of everyone. The prosecutor opened the hearing by recounting the facts. The assault against Eleanor, Clara's manipulation, the evidence of falsified contracts, and the testimonies that confirmed the web of deceit. Each word was a hammer blow that resounded in the room. Clara pretended to faint in her chair, wiping away tears that no one believed. Eleanor, her gaze fixed, listened to every detail as if they were scars turned into sentences. The time came to testify. Eleanor stood up with a firm step and stood before the judge. She recounted what had happened in the studio that night. The argument, Clara's feigned crying, Jack's rage, his hand squeezing her neck, the mistress's triumphant smile. Her words were clear, serene, but loaded with a truth that shook everyone. There were no screams or dramatics, just the strength of someone who was no longer afraid. When she finished, the room fell silent, and even the journalists forgot to take notes for a few seconds. Clara asked to intervene. In a trembling voice, she accused Eleanor of making it all up, of being a jealous and vengeful woman. She said that the documents presented were manipulations, that she was only seeking love and recognition. But when the prosecutor showed the emails in which she boasted of manipulating Jack and destroying the marriage, her mask cracked. She tried to deny it, but the evidence was so overwhelming that even her own lawyers looked down. The most dramatic moment came when Jack took the stand. His voice was weak, filled with remorse. He admitted that he had lost control, that Clara had manipulated him, and that he, blinded by ambition and desire, had betrayed his wife. He said that his mistake would haunt him for life, and that he deserved the social condemnation he was already suffering. Eleanor looked at him in silence. She felt no compassion or anger, only the certainty that that man was no longer part of her life. The room erupted in murmurs. The judge called for order and, after hearing from the parties, concluded the testimonies. The verdict would be announced the next day, but the atmosphere was already charged with a truth that was impossible to hide. Clara had been unmasked before everyone. Jack was sinking in his own guilt, and Eleanor was emerging as a symbol of dignity. Upon leaving the courthouse, a crowd was waiting for her. Some journalists shouted her name, others asked for photos. Eleanor raised her hand with serenity and declared that her fight was not personal, but for all the women who had ever been silenced. Her words spread like wildfire. New York spoke of her that night, not as a victim, but as an example. In the privacy of her home, Eleanor sat with her parents. Mrs. Davis caressed her face and said that she had shown a strength that even they had not imagined. Mr. Davis, with moist eyes, confessed that he had never been so proud. Mark toasted with them with a glass of wine and assured them that what had happened would mark a before and after. Eleanor smiled for the first time in weeks, not because of the victory itself, but because she had recovered what she thought was lost: inner peace. The next morning, the judge delivered the sentence. Clara was found guilty of fraud, manipulation, and falsification. Jack was publicly reprimanded, forced to take responsibility, and removed from his corporate positions. The room erupted in contained applause, and Eleanor, with tears in her eyes, breathed a sigh of relief. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. That night, Eleanor walked alone through Times Square. The lights illuminated the cobblestone pavement, and the city buzzed with its usual hustle and bustle. For the first time in a long time, she felt that she could look to the future without fear. She remembered the words she had repeated to herself so many times: "The truth always endures." She looked up at the starry sky and swore that she would never let pain chain her again. She had survived, she had fought, and she had won. With a firm step, she walked away through the crowd, leaving behind the shadow of Jack and Clara. The story had ended, but in her heart, a new stage was opening. Eleanor had reclaimed her life, and above all, she had shown that the strength of a united family and personal dignity could tear down any empire built on lies. In the memory of those who heard this story, the image of a woman who walked through the darkness to reclaim her voice remains. It was not the roar of the headlines or the public downfall of the guilty that marked the end, but the serenity with which she chose to walk forward, accompanied by the quiet strength of her family. The echo of that trial was not just a social episode. It was the confirmation that even in the most bitter moments, dignity can be reborn when the heart is held by true love. The lesson that emerges is clear. No one can erase the pain of the past, but it is possible to transform it into a new opportunity to reconcile with oneself and with others. Forgiveness does not always mean forgetting, but learning to live with scars that remind us where we came from and where we do not want to return. Like the bells that ring every afternoon in Times Square, reminding us of the continuity of time, life always offers second chances to those who know how to listen to them with humility. The family, in its daily simplicity, becomes the most solid refuge against the storm. And love, when defended with courage, illuminates even the darkest corners. Perhaps now, while each of us thinks about the affections that surround us, it is worth stopping for a moment, looking into the eyes of those who accompany us, recognizing their small gestures, valuing the calm of a shared conversation, or the knowing silence of any afternoon. Because in the end, true wealth is not measured in power or prestige, but in the certainty of having a home to return to. If this story has awakened any emotion or memory in you, share it with those you hold dear, because in that transmission, the flame of a community that learns from its own experiences is lit. And so, like a candle lit in the gloom, love and family unity will continue to be a beacon and comfort on the journey of our lives.